The wooden floor of the airfield trembled beneath the roar of engines. It was still dark England, winter of 1944. The 8th Air Force was preparing for another daylight bombing run into the heart of Germany. Mechanics shouted over the thunder of engines, and young men barely 20 checked their guns with trembling hands. They'd flown dozens of missions already, yet the fear never changed. Among them stood Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, a tail gunner from South Boston. Thick accent, hard eyes, and a scar above his eyebrow that hinted at a dozen bar fights before the war ever began. To his crew, Donovan wasn't just another gunner, he was a survivor. Someone who'd already beaten death more than once. When you flew in a B-17, survival wasn't promised. Every mission meant 25,000 feet of freezing air, German flak bursting all round, and Messerschmitts diving in like hawks. And at the very end of that fortress, in the cold glass dome of the tail turret, sat the man who saw death coming first, Michael Donovan. He had one rule for his crew: if you wait for them to fire first, you're already dead. That wasn't bravado, it was experience. He'd learned the hard way gunners who hesitated didn't make it back. Donovan believed in aggressive defense. Strike before the enemy gets comfortable. Make them fear your guns before they even line up their shot. Early missions had proven the opposite approach didn't work. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies. German pilots dove straight through bomber formations, tearing through with precision and arrogance. American gunners were told to conserve ammunition, fire short bursts, wait for clear shots. That doctrine was killing men. Donovan didn't care for doctrine. He cared about staying alive. On one mission over Bremen, a formation of B-17s was hit hard. Tail gunners were being shredded before they could even respond. But Donovan, watching his quadrant through a frozen turret window, saw the German fighters forming early. He didn't wait. He opened fire from extreme range tracers cutting the morning sky, forcing the enemy to break formation before they even began their run. His pilot yelled over the intercom, "Jesus, Mike, they're out of range." Donovan just growled back, "Then they'll think twice before getting in range." That day, the bomber formation made it home with minimal losses. Word spread quickly through the 8th Air Force squadrons about a tail gunner who fired first, and somehow kept surviving. Within weeks, other gunners began adopting Donovan's method: sustained, preemptive fire, coordinated sectors, communication through tracers. German fighters who once dove confidently into Burma streams now pulled away under sheets of lead. What began as one man's instinct soon became a philosophy of survival, and that philosophy would soon be tested on March 6, 1944, the day Michael Donovan rewrote the rules of aerial combat forever. It was the morning of March 6, 1944, the mission to Berlin. For the men of the 8th Air Force, that name alone sent a chill deeper than the cold. Berlin meant the heart of the Reich, defended by the best the Luftwaffe had left. Hundreds of B-17s and B-24s assembled over England, each heavy with bombs and fear. Michael Donovan climbed into his tail turret before dawn. The metal seat was freezing, the glass canopy fogged by his breath. He adjusted the twin .50 calibers, checked the feed belts, and looked once more at the photograph taped to the side his mother and little brother. Back in Boston, the engines roared to full power. Donovan grinned slightly and muttered, "All right, let's go hunting." At 27,000 feet, the air was thin and cruel. Frost crept along the guns, and every vibration of the aircraft echoed through his bones. Below, Europe stretched out in patches of grey and white occupied, burning, scarred. The bombers moved in tight formation, each relying on the other for survival. Then came the call over the intercom: bandits. 11 o'clock high. More at 6 o'clock, closing fast. Dozens of black specks grew in the distance: Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s. Moving in perfect coordination. The German tactic was always the same approach from the rear: fire rockets, then dive through the formation. It was a slaughterhouse for unprepared gunners, but Donovan was ready. He waited until the enemy fighters were still 1,000 yards out, then squeezed the triggers. The twin Brownings thundered to life, tracers streaking through the frozen air like molten comets. Other gunners hesitated, but Donovan's early fire forced the German pilots to break their tight attack pattern. Two fighters peeled away instantly, losing formation. The rest hesitated, just long enough for other bombers to align their guns. Tail gunner to formation fire now. Donovan barked into his MiG. Within seconds, an entire row of B-17s opened up, the sky behind them turning into a wall of lead. The Luftwaffe fighters tried to punch through. Wondered low Donovan tracked him with calm precision. He led the shot, counted the distance, and pressed the trigger in steady rhythm. The fighter burst into flame, its wings shearing off as it spiraled downward. Another tried a head-on roll through the formation. Donovan switched targets, firing short. Controlled bursts until the canopy exploded. In 4 minutes, it was over. 12 enemy fighters destroyed. The German squadron broke off completely, abandoning the attack. Donovan's bomber, though riddled with holes, kept formation. Not one crew member was killed. When the bombers landed that evening, the base was silent. Mechanics counted the bullet holes, gunners stared in disbelief. Donovan had fired nearly 2,000 rounds, emptied his belts completely but saved an entire formation. Word spread through every squadron in England. The South Boston gunner took down 12 fighters by himself. Command officers were skeptical. No one believed a single tail gunner could do that much damage. But mission reports, radio intercepts, and even German field transmissions confirmed it. Donovan's defense wasn't luck. It was a new way of fighting. He called it aggressive defense. A simple idea: don't wait to react. Act first. Control the sky before the enemy can. That night, Donovan sat alone outside the hangar, a cigarette burning between his fingers. The other gunners cheered him as a hero, but he said nothing. He only muttered the same words he always did: fear happens when you react. Confidence happens when you act first. What no one knew that night was that Donovan's 4-minute battle had just rewritten aerial warfare doctrine, and within months, his methods would spread across the entire 8th Air Force. When the bombers touched down that evening, the ground crew rushed to meet them. The tail section of Donovan's B-17 looked like it had been chewed apart by the sky itself. Holes punched through the armor, shattered glass glinting in the fading sunlight. Yet somehow, it had made it home. Crew Chief Murphy climbed up, inspecting the turret. The ammunition boxes were completely empty, every round fired. He found Donovan sitting on the tarmac, helmet off, smoke curling from a cigarette between his fingers. "You used everything," Murphy said quietly. 2,000 rounds. Every bullet we loaded. Donovan exhaled slowly. Had to. Didn't have enough to waste any. A small crowd formed around him: officers, pilots, fellow gunners. Lieutenant Whitmore stepped forward, disbelief written on his face. "How many did you get?" he asked. Murphy checked the mission logs, reports from other crews, even the radio intercepts from German transmissions. Then, finally, he looked up. 12 confirmed kills. For probables, 3 damaged. The airfield fell silent. Whitmore stared at Donovan, trying to find words. 12 fighters. In one mission? In 4 minutes, Murphy added. By sunset, the story had spread across the entire bomber group. By dawn, every tail gunner on the base wanted to know how Donovan had done it. By noon, pilots from other squadrons were requesting briefings. By evening, high-ranking officers from 8th Air Force headquarters arrived in person. Among them was Major General Frederick Anderson, the commanding officer of Bomber Command. He found Donovan in the enlisted barracks, sitting cross-legged on the floor, cleaning his guns like it was any other day. "Sergeant Donovan," Anderson said, introducing himself. Donovan stood at attention. "At ease, son. I'm here to understand what you did up there." Donovan hesitated, then explained everything, the philosophy behind his actions. Aggressive fire, psychological pressure, attacking during the enemy's formation phase, when their coordination was weakest. He described it not as heroism, but as logic. "If you wait," he said, "you die. You've got to make them flinch first." Anderson listened silently, hands clasped behind his back. When Donovan finished, the general asked one question: "Can you teach this?" Donovan frowned. "Not to everyone. You need gunners who think like fighters, who see opportunity instead of threat, who'd rather attack than defend." "Then find them," Anderson said firmly. You're being reassigned to training command. I'm authorizing a special program. Your tactics will be taught to every tail gunner. In the 8th Air Force, Donovan's expression hardened. Sir, with respect, I'd rather stay with my crew. Anderson shook his head. Your crew doesn't need you anymore, Donovan. They're alive because of what you did. But other crews are dying because their gunners don't know what you know. Which is more important, 9 men or 9,000? The answer hung heavy in the air. Donovan looked down at the twin Brownings, still stained with powder and oil. Finally, he nodded. Understood, sir. That night, he walked back to the runway where the shadows of the bombers stretched long across the concrete. The engines were quiet now, but the memory of that 4-minute storm echoed in his mind. The traces, the chaos, the silence that followed. He didn't know it yet, but the training that would come from this moment would reshape the very nature of aerial combat. Within weeks, the first drafts of what would be called the Donovan Doctrine began to circulate. A new way of thinking, a new way of surviving, a new way of fighting back. The orders came through officially 3 days later. Sergeant Michael Donovan was to report to the 8th Air Force Training Command at Debden. His mission, to teach gunners how to survive by taking the fight to the enemy. He didn't look like a teacher. He still wore his flak jacket half unzipped, his sleeves rolled, his eyes sunken from endless missions. But when he spoke, men listened. He began with a simple statement written across the chalkboard: if you wait for them to shoot first, you're already dead. That became the heartbeat of the Donovan Doctrine. The training was unlike anything the Air Force had ever seen. For 2 weeks, each trainee was thrown into relentless drills, live-fire simulations, mock fighter attacks, and mental conditioning exercises designed to break fear and replace it with aggression. Donovan's approach was part science, part instinct. He believed that survival was not about defense, it was about dominance. First principle, seize the initiative. Don't let them form up, heat bark. Attack during their organization phase. Break their rhythm before it starts. Force them to react to you. Second principle, psychological warfare. He would pace in front of the gunners, voice low, intense. Your first burst doesn't have to kill. It has to scare. Make them doubt their plan. Make them second-guess every move. Third principle, focused fire. When you're outnumbered, don't waste shots. Pick the most dangerous fighter, the leader, and take him out. The rest will lose coordination. Every man in that hangar could feel the electricity in his voice. Donovan wasn't preaching theory, he was teaching survival written in gunfire and smoke. Over time, the trainees began to understand. The hesitation that once clouded their eyes started to fade. They stopped flinching when engines screamed overhead. They started fighting like predators instead of prey. Not everyone could handle it. Nearly a third of the candidates washed out. Some couldn't overcome the instinct to duck and hide. Others froze under simulated attack. Donovan didn't judge them, he understood. But for those who stayed, something inside them changed forever. Donovan walked the line every morning, inspecting the guns, the men, the resolve. He demanded precision not just in aim, but in thought. Confidence isn't a feeling, he told them once. It's a decision. You decide you're not going to die today, and you make them believe it. By late spring 1944, word of his results began spreading through the Air Force. Squadrons that trained under Donovan's program were coming home with fewer losses and higher kill ratios. Commanders who had once called his tactics reckless now demanded his methods for their own units. The Donovan Doctrine had become more than a training manual, it was a revolution in the sky. Each graduate carried the same mindset into combat. Seize the moment, strike first, and never give the enemy a chance to breathe. And above it all, Donovan's voice echoed through the gun turrets of hundreds of bombers across Europe. Fear happens when you react. Confidence happens when you act first. The doctrine wasn't just saving planes, it was saving lives. And before long, even the German pilots began to notice. By the summer of 1944, the skies above Europe were changing. The Luftwaffe, once the undisputed predator of the air, was beginning to hesitate. Not because their planes had weakened, but because their prey had learned how to bite back. From England to the Rhineland, German pilots began reporting strange behavior from American bombers. They no longer flew defensively, no longer waited for the attack. They opened fire at extreme range, wild, defiant, unrelenting. Tracer rounds asked across the clouds like fiery whips, cutting into formations before the Germans could even align their shots. At first, the Luftwaffe dismissed these reports as panic. But then, the losses began to mount. Entire fighter formations scattered before reaching their targets. Commanders complained of psychological disruption among their men. One after-action report simply read, "American tail gunners now fire as if they are hunting us." That was the Donovan doctrine in action. From his training base, Michael Donovan watched his students return from missions, alive, confident, sometimes even smiling. They carried the look of men who had stared death in the face and made death blink first. The numbers told the story better than any medal could. Before Donovan's tactics spread, tail gunner casualty rates averaged 38%. By June 1944, they had dropped to 23%. Same missions, same enemy, different mindset. But it wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. The air war itself began to shift. German fighters, once so fearless, started breaking off attacks when they recognized a bomber formation that opened fire early. The mark of a Donovan-trained crew. Some pilots refused to engage altogether. American radio operators intercepted frantic enemy chatter. Avoid those B-17s. They shoot first. Donovan's philosophy had spread like wildfire. Everywhere, gunners spoke his name, sometimes in awe, sometimes in disbelief. But those who had flown under his doctrine understood the truth. He had given them permission to fight like wolves instead of sheep. One of Donovan's first trainees, Sergeant Thomas Bailey, became a legend in his own right. 16 confirmed kills in just for missions. Another, Robert Chen, completed 27 missions without taking a single round to his turret. Both credited Donovan's teachings, not luck. At headquarters, analysts began crunching the numbers. The results were undeniable. Aggressive fire didn't just destroy more enemy planes. It prevented attacks altogether. Half of all planned German assaults were aborted before even reaching firing position. What Donovan had created was more than a tactic. It was a psychological weapon. A silent, invisible force that lived in the minds of the enemy. In the barracks, his men used to repeat one of his favorite lines, almost like a prayer before a mission, "Make them afraid to come near you." By mid-1944, that prayer had become prophecy. The Luftwaffe, once feared across continents, was now being outmatched by the very men it had hunted for years. And somewhere in England, Sergeant Donovan, the street fighter from South Boston, looked up at the passing bombers and smiled faintly. He knew the skies were finally fighting back. By the summer of 1943, the skies above Europe thundered with a different sound, a deeper, more confident roar. The Mosquito was no longer just a rumor whispered among Allied squadrons. It had become a legend in the making. From the fjords of Norway to the heart of Berlin, its shadow carried both fear and awe. Inside a dimly lit hangar in Hatfield, the hum of saws and scent of varnished wood filled the air. Craftsmen worked with surgical precision, shaving, bending, and bonding each piece of birch and balsa. These weren't mere workers, they were artisans shaping the war's most unlikely weapon. The irony was poetic. While Germany poured steel and fire into the sky, Britain answered with wood and spirit. On the front lines, pilots who once doubted the Mosquito now swore by it. Squadron leader George Perry remembered his first encounter vividly. "It climbed like a ghost," he would later say, his eyes distant. "One moment, we were spotted by German radar. The next, we were gone, to fast to high." Every mission tested the limits of the aircraft and the men who flew it. Mosquito crews struck deep into enemy territory, low-level raids that demanded nerve of steel. They skimmed treetops and church spires, flying so low that their propellers kicked up waves on rivers below. But one mission would mark the Mosquito's true legend: the raid on the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo. The plan was audacious: strike the heart of Nazi intelligence, destroy records, and free captured resistance members. It was a mission that seemed impossible, and yet The Mosquito was built for the impossible. On the morning of September 25, 1942, a formation of four mosquitoes roared across the North Sea, hugging the waves. The sky was overcast, the air biting cold. Radar operators on the Norwegian coast barely noticed the tiny blips before they vanished into radio silence. Minutes later, explosions shattered the calm, precision strikes tearing through concrete and steel. Windows across Oslo rattled as the city held its breath. When the smoke cleared, the Gestapo building lay in ruins. Dozens of Norwegian prisoners walked free. And from that day on, the Mosquito wasn't just a plane, it was a symbol. A message to every occupied nation that hope still soared in the skies above. Back in London, the Ministry of Information wasted no time. Newsreels showed the daring raid in dramatic detail. The wooden plane that struck the Nazis where they least expected it. Across Europe, whispers of the wooden wasp spread through resistance networks, igniting courage where fear once lived, and yet, for the men who flew those missions, glory came at a price. Many never returned. Their aircraft vanished into storm clouds or German flak, their fate unknown. In mess halls, empty chairs spoke louder than medals, but the legend endured. Each mosquito that rose into the dawn carried their memory, and their defiance into the heart of war. By 1944, the Mosquito had become more than a machine. It was an extension of human will, fast, precise, and untamed. The Allies had unleashed it in every corner of the war, from night skies over Berlin to the jungles of Burma, and everywhere it went, it danced a deadly ballet, silent, elegant, devastating at Rath Marham. Dusk painted the sky in shades of crimson and smoke. Pilots gathered around briefing tables, faces lit by the faint red glow of lamps. The target, a German rail junction near Cologne. Timing was everything. The Mosquitoes would strike under cover of night, threading through searchlights and anti-aircraft fire as engines roared to life. The wooden wings shimmered under moonlight, almost ethereal. The takeoff was poetry in motion, twin engines harmonizing in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of defiance. Over occupied Europe, the night was alive with danger. Flak bursts bloomed like iron flowers in the sky, yet the Mosquito moved with unmatched grace, weaving between them. Its wooden frame invisible to much of Germany's radar. The Luftwaffe tried to chase, but their Messerschmitts could rarely keep up for the German pilots. The Mosquito became a phantom they both feared and respected. It could appear out of nowhere, drop its payload with surgical precision, and vanish before a siren could sound. One German ace described it bitterly. It was like fighting a ghost made of wind. But not all battles were fought with bombs. Some were duels of patience, fought in the cold silence of high altitude. Mosquito night fighters hunted German bombers by radar, their screens glowing faint green in the dark. When contact was made, the chase was silent and swift, to bursts from the Hispano cannons, and the night would flash with fire. Then darkness again. In one mission over the roar, Flight Lieutenant Jack Montgomery and his navigator picked up a target, a Ju-88 bomber. For 20 tense minutes, they stalked it through cloud and moonlight, never seen, never heard. When they finally struck, the German plane vanished into flame, and Montgomery whispered through the intercom for London. Each victory carried the weight of loss. Each return to base meant someone else hadn't. The camaraderie among Mosquito crews was unspoken, carved by fear and forged by trust. In those cramped cockpits, the men shared everything, the silence, the terror, the triumph. Historians would later call it the wooden miracle. But to those who lived it, it was something deeper, a brotherhood of flight, bound by courage and fragility. The Mosquito had turned the tide not through sheer force, but through elegance, a symphony of speed, skill, and sacrifice. By the war's end, the Mosquito had flown more than 30,000 sorties. It had bombed, photographed, fought, and saved countless lives. Yet, even as newer, faster jets began to appear, nothing ever matched its spirit. It was proof that in war, as in life, sometimes the lightest touch leaves the deepest mark. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the world exhaled for the first time in 6 long years. Smoke still drifted across the ruins of Europe, silent witnesses to the price of freedom. Amid that silence, the mosquito stood as a symbol of ingenuity, courage, and the quiet power of those who refused to yield. The wooden wonder, as it came to be known, had defied every doubt. It had outrun fighters, outmaneuvered flak, and outhauled the war itself. Engineers who built it with glue and balsa were once called dreamers. Now they were heroes. Its pilots, many barely in their 20s, had written a new chapter in aerial warfare, one where brains triumphed over brute force. In the post-war years, mosquitoes continued to serve in new skies, flying with the Royal Air Force into the early 1950s, mapping uncharted lands and conducting reconnaissance in conflicts far from home. But even as the jet age dawned, old pilots still spoke of the mosquito with reverence. Like a first love they could never quite forget. At reunions decades later, those who once flew wooden wings would gather with weathered faces and trembling hands. They would trace the outline of that sleek twin-engine frame in the air and smile, remembering nights when the world burned below and the stars were their only witnesses. One pilot said softly, "It wasn't just a plane, it was freedom itself." Museums now hold her remains, polished wood and metal resting beneath glass. Children press their faces against the barriers, staring up at something they cannot fully understand. The old veterans, standing beside them, do. They remember the hum of the engines, the tremor of flak beneath, the laughter of a navigator in the dark. The mosquito was proof that greatness can be crafted not from steel, but from imagination, and that even in war. Beauty can take flight. Its legacy lives on in every stealth aircraft that slips unseen through the skies, in every mission that values precision over power. The principles that guided her design, speed, intelligence, surprise became the foundation of modern air warfare. But beyond the strategy and the science, the mosquito left behind something deeper, a reminder of human spirit, that even when the world falls into chaos, the courage to create can still shine through the smoke. As the years fade and the veterans grow fewer, their stories remain. They echo through hangars and airfields, through wind and memory, the song of the mosquito, the hum of defiance, a machine born from desperation, carried by hope, and remembered for grace. The last mosquito flight took place under a calm English sky, its engines purring like a heartbeat from another age. As it disappeared into the clouds, one could almost believe that history itself was taking flight again. And though the world has changed, the message endures that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is imagination.